in terms of the essence, again, Budapest, but it might as well be Munich. We know from history that appeasing a dictator never leads to peace. I think everybody remembers those, images of Neville Chamberlain waving that piece of paper after he came back from the Munich meeting with Hitler and proclaiming peace in our time. We know how that one worked out.
Vladimir Kara-Murza, just tell us first what this arrest in absentia means to you in your everyday life.
Well, look, frankly, for me, this is all circus because I've had this all for real. Sleeping carriages, punishment cells, solitary confinement in Siberia. I've done it in real time. So all of these in absentia arrest warrants are just a continuing circus from the Putin regime. But what I think it speaks to, again, is just the sheer astonishing hypocrisy. Because here we have a dictator, Vladimir Putin, who's been in power for 25 years, who has literally murdered his main political opponents, Boris Nemtsov and Alexei Navalny, who's imprisoning thousands of our own Russian citizens simply for speaking the truth, simply for speaking out against this murderous war in Ukraine, and who is daily bombing peaceful cities in a neighboring sovereign country, bombing hospitals, schools, residential areas, killing families, killing children. And he's accusing his political opponents, us, of being terrorists. Those are the official charges. And just so our viewers are clear about this, our so-called terrorist activity was organizing a rally, a demonstration in Berlin earlier this year against Vladimir Putin, against the war in Ukraine, a demonstration protest of the political killings and political persecution of Putin's opponents in Russia. For that, Yulia Navalny, the widow of Alexei Navalny, Ilya Yashin, and I were indicted as terrorists by the Russian state and had these criminal proceedings started in absentia. But look, again, for me, I'm sitting here now and speaking with you, but I am thinking of all of my friends and colleagues who are now behind bars for real. I'm thinking of Maxim Kruglov, my friend, the deputy leader of Yabloko, Russia's last remaining opposition party, who tried to help me as much as he could when I was in prison. He would come to all of my trials, or he would try to, because they were held behind closed doors, but he would wait in a corridor outside every time. He would bombard the prison authorities in Omsk with protests every time they found a way to make my conditions more unbearable, extending time in a punishment cell or forbidding another phone call to my children. Now it is he who is in prison for social media posts against the war in Ukraine. It is he who needs our help. I'm thinking of Mikhail Kryger, an anti-war activist who is now on his 23rd day of a hunger strike in protest at his unbearable prison conditions because he's being constantly kept in solitary confinement. I'm thinking of a young musician from St. Petersburg, Diana Loginova, an 18-year-old musical college student who was arrested and placed in custody yesterday for singing anti-war songs on the streets of St. Petersburg. This is the Orwellian reality of Vladimir Putin's Russia today, where the real criminals, the real terrorists are sitting in the Kremlin and are holding power now in violation of all norms of civilized rules and law for 25 years. And you have musicians and anti-war activists and peaceful opposition politicians being sent to prison on Trump-top charges. This is the Orwellian reality that Russia exists in under Vladimir Putin.
Well, what does it tell you, the fact that the FSB, the Kremlin, has moved against, you're one of 22 exiled politicians, business people, artists, activists who have been targeted and charged by the FSB this week? I mean, what does it tell you about the kind of state of paranoia, really, in Russia at the moment?
Well, there are actually two new criminal cases against me this week. The one I was referring to is together with Yulia Navalny and Ilya Yashin, who were organizing this demonstration in Berlin. The one you just referred to, the 22, that's another criminal case against founding members of the Anti-War Committee of Russia, of which I am one. And that was triggered by the recent developments, historic developments, when earlier this month, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which is a body that brings together parliamentarians from 46 European countries. Used to be 47, but Russia was kicked out after Putin invaded Ukraine. But this is the largest and oldest pan-European intergovernmental organization. The UK is a part of it too. And so earlier this month, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe decided to establish a platform for dialogue with the Russian democratic opposition. In essence, an unofficial Russian opposition delegation to the Council of Europe, such as one that already exists for Belarus. The only two European countries that are currently outside the Council of Europe are Russia and Belarus. The last two dictatorships in Europe. But of course, the leaders of the Council of Europe, people with long-term and strategic vision, realize that Europe will not be complete without two countries. And so while those dictatorships are obviously excluded from the organization, they decided to make sure that the societies of these countries still have a voice through representatives of their democratic opposition. And this
Putin
really,
sees that as a threat. See that you're sort of being given a legitimacy through that.
well, absolutely, and first of all, let's just say the obvious that Putin has long lost any legitimacy he may have once had. In 2023, the same body I'm talking about, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, passed a resolution officially declaring a policy of non-recognition of Vladimir Putin as president of Russia after May 2024, after he stayed in power in clear violation of term limits. I mean, before, as you know, he sort of used these pseudo-legal gimmicks to stay in power, where they switched with Medvedev and so on. After 2024, he just plainly violated constitutional term limits to stay in power, and Europe's largest parliamentary body declared that this is illegitimate and that Putin is a usurper. They said that 2 + 2 is 4. They called things for what they are, and they said that Vladimir Putin is not a legitimate head of state, that he's an illegitimate usurper. And last year in 2024, the same decision was taken by the European Parliament. This is obviously something that enrages the Kremlin, because Vladimir Putin wants to be respected. He wants to be treated as an equal. He wants to be recognized as a bona fide member of the international community, which he is not. And so this move by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to actually open up an official dialogue with the Russian democratic opposition while refusing to recognize Putin as a legitimate president, well, you can see how that makes the Kremlin feel, and we see this from their reaction this week.
But does it also suggest that Putin and the Kremlin are thinking about what comes next, what comes after him? He's 73 now. Traditionally, Russian leaders haven't lived always that long or much beyond that. Do you think he's thinking about how to sort of somehow organize a transition?
I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know what he's thinking. What I know is, as a historian, that every time there was a leadership change in Russia, every time since 1762, since Catherine the Great came to power in a coup d'etat against her husband, Peter III, every time since then and up until today, with one sole exception, Konstantin Chernenko in the early 80s, he was very ill. He was in intensive care. He couldn't do anything. But every other time there was a leadership change, there was a complete shift in policy, 180 degrees turn. Even when the next person came from the previous ruling group, Nikita Khrushchev was one of Stalin's closest acolytes, and yet it was he who released millions of people from the Gulag. Mikhail Gorbachev was a protege of Yuri Andropov, one of the most repressive Soviet leaders in the 20th century. Of course, Putin was appointed by Boris Yeltsin and just completely reversed all of his policies. So whatever Putin wants or plans, we know that whenever there's a next political change in Russia, there will be a 180-degree shift in policy. This does not mean, of course, that Russia will be a thriving democracy the next day. What it does mean is that there will be a window of opportunity for democratic change in Russia. And we must be ready to seize that window of opportunity and to make sure that the next time there's a chance for democratic transition in Russia, it succeeds, because this is important for all of us. And what happens in Russia affects everyone, as I think the world has seen in the worst possible way over these last 3.5 years. The only true guarantee of long-term peace and security in Europe is a democratic Russia, a Russia that would respect the norms of the rule of law, both inside and outside of its borders. That is the goal that we should all be working towards. And the time to prepare for that, to lay down those roadmaps, is now.
Yeah, and that's why your work is so important. I wanted to talk about today's events because Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting Donald Trump in the White House. There's this meeting looming, another meeting between Trump and Putin. Does that fill you with despair or hope that Zelensky has been given this audience, he might be granted the tomahawks that he's asked for, or are you despairing really that Trump has once again succumbed to a meeting with Putin, which allows him to dictate the terms?
Well, I think, despair is not the word I would use here. There's nothing new in this. We have seen this for the last 9 months that the Trump administration has been in office. I mean, he's given Putin these meaningless ultimatums. There's 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 days, 5 days. I think people just lost count of them, and then nothing ever happens after that. And the announcement of this new meeting in Budapest. I mean, look, we've seen all this in Alaska, in Anchorage, in August of this year. It was absolutely despicable, frankly, to see those television images of an indicted war criminal who, let's not forget, that's who Vladimir Putin is. He has an active arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court over the war crimes his army is committing in Ukraine. An indicted war criminal being welcomed on U.S. soil, walking, down the red carpet next to the American president. And it looks like we're going to see a repeat of that in a couple of weeks in Budapest. What I'm actually really interested in is how Putin's going to get there, because if you look at on the map of Europe, there's no way to get from Moscow to Budapest without crossing the airspace of an EU or NATO country, a country that would actually recognize and may potentially honor the ICC arrest warrant. And of course, Putin's paranoid about that. We know that he has refused to travel even to the friendliest countries like Brazil or South Africa, because that would mean flying over the airspace of a country that could recognize the warrant, land the plane, and then send him off to The Hague.
Even though in practice, no one's going to do that, are they?
Well, you know what? Whoever did do that would go down in history. And I think would earn the gratitude of billions of people on this planet. But the point here is that Putin is paranoid about this. And the reason that the last Putin-Trump meeting took place in Alaska was because that was the only way Putin could travel from Russia directly to the United States without crossing any other country's airspace. It's just a short 60-mile flyover the Bering Strait between the Russian Far East and the American state of Alaska. Budapest is in the middle of Europe. I'm really genuinely interested as to how they're planning to organize that.
So do you doubt in some ways that this meeting will ever happen?
Well, it's been announced and confirmed by both sides. Let's see how they organize it. But in terms of the essence, again, Budapest, but it might as well be Munich. We know from history that appeasing a dictator never leads to peace. I think everybody remembers those, images of Neville Chamberlain waving that piece of paper after he came back from the Munich meeting with Hitler and proclaiming peace in our time. We know how that one worked out. And we know that every time somebody tried to placate and appease an aggressor, it never led to peace. It led to more war. It led to more blood. It led to more suffering. Aggressors do not stop. They can only be stopped. And Vladimir Putin has to be stopped by the international community.
So do you think that Trump may end up being a latter-day Neville Chamberlain?
Well, that's certainly the way he has been behaving over these last years, certainly when it comes to specifically to Putin and Russia. You can see this double standard in policy, even, for example, when it comes to the issue of political prisoners, something with which we began this conversation. It was the US administration that secured the release of dozens of political prisoners from Belarus recently, dozens of political prisoners from Venezuela. But when it comes to Russia, there's just some sort of a wall, there's some sort of a block. There has not been a single Russian political prisoner who was released in the kind of exchange that we were released in last year under the previous US administration. There seems to be some kind of a block for this American administration, for this American president, when it comes to Vladimir Putin. And we got yet more proof of that yesterday with this wonderful, amazing, or whatever the term was, phone call, 2.5-hour phone call, and agreed upon meeting in Budapest. Again, it's Budapest, but it might as well be Munich. Placating and appeasing an aggressor never leads to peace.
So you don't think that Trump might have learned something from the way he was sort of played by Putin in Alaska? I mean, on the contrary, do you think that the Kremlin still has some kind of hold over Trump, whatever that might be, some kind of compromise? What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of theories out there. Obviously, I don't have any first-hand information. What I do think is that Donald Trump just likes Vladimir Putin. I mean, he just genuinely likes him. I think they're very much alike, as they're very similar as personalities, in terms of mindset, in terms of psychotype, in terms of the way they would like to rule. I mean, I think Trump would love to rule the way that Putin does, without elections, without parliament, without independent judiciary, without independent media. And the difference, of course, is, when Putin came to power, Russia only had 10 years of democracy behind it, and our institutions, our democratic institutions and traditions were still very weak, and Putin was able to quickly dismantle and destroy them. America, for all the potential criticism of it, it has a 250-year tradition of democracy. And, whatever Mr. Trump wants, I don't think he'll be able to establish a system of the kind that Putin has been able to establish in Russia.
I mean, given this strange sort of rapport between Putin and Trump, and as you say, they share sort of certain similarities, even though, of course, one's democratically elected and the other's a dictator. Do you feel safe in America? You've had issues with the Russian embassy and your passport in the past. Do you feel that you are in a safe haven or not?
Well, Kathy, I've survived 2 poisonings from the FSB was in a coma both times and nearly died. And I was sentenced to 25 years in prison for speaking out against Putin, against the war in Ukraine. I was held in solitary confinement in maximum security prison in Siberia. I think I'm going to be okay, you know, in whatever country I happen to be now.
Whatever Trump throws at you.
You know, I just try not to think about it, frankly. That's the surest road to paranoia if you live constantly wallowing in those thoughts. And I don't have the luxury of time for that. There's too much work to do.
Vladimir Kara-Murza, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.